Amid the bustling crowd at London Heathrow Airport, a startling scene unfolded. A black woman, dressed in an impeccable navy suit, her keen eyes brimming with intellect, stood handcuffed by two white police officers in the bright light of day. She didn't resist or raise her voice. Instead, she fixed a steely gaze on the men, misusing their authority. "You've just made the gravest error of your careers," she declared, her tone steady yet sharp, slicing through the officers' smug confidence. They smirked in response. "A black woman wants to act the big shot, does she?" they taunted, oblivious to the storm brewing. In mere minutes, the tide would turn completely. They had no inkling that the woman they just demeaned was far from ordinary, and once her identity came to light, their careers would crumble on the spot. What had led to this pivotal clash, and what fate awaited those who wielded power so recklessly? Let's step into today's tale. It was a chilly morning at Heathrow, with travelers rushing through terminals, hauling luggage to catch flights or navigate exits. Overhead, the loudspeakers droned on, listing arrivals and departures in an endless loop. At the arrivals hall, fresh from a flight from Manchester, Dr. Evelyn Carter emerged with a poised and commanding air. She was a tall black woman in her 40s, her rich mahogany skin glowing with vitality, her expression a blend of gravity and authority. Her piercing eyes sparkled with wisdom and experience, always scanning, always assessing. Today, Evelyn wore a meticulously tailored navy suit, a sleek silver Cartier watch adorning her wrist, accentuating her aura of influence. Her tight coils of hair were swept into a neat bun at the base of her neck, highlighting the strong contours of her face. Every stride she took was purposeful, exuding confidence. Without a trace of doubt, Evelyn wasn't just a high-ranking Mi-5 officer. She was one of the foremost experts on organized crime and institutional corruption in the UK. With over 2 decades in the field, she spearheaded countless investigations, unraveled jaw-dropping cases, and brought down scores of crooked officials. She was accustomed to wary glances and whispered biases, especially from those unaccustomed to a black woman wielding such power. But Evelyn never let prejudice slow her down. This trip to London wasn't for a case, though. She was here for a critical national security summit. She'd just come from a private meeting in Manchester with top brass from Mi-5 and the Home Office, where she delivered a groundbreaking report on money laundering networks involving transnational networks. Evelyn was now in London to further the discussion with experts and delegates from various agencies. Though accustomed to constant travel, she felt a slight weariness after a long day, but it didn't dull her polished presence. As she cleared the security area, she paused, taking a deep breath to soak in the lively hum of Heathrow, then pressed on toward the exit. Unbeknownst to her, 2 pairs of eyes had locked onto her from the moment she stepped into view. Thomas Hayes and Daniel Shaw, 2 airport police officers, lingered near the baggage reclaim area. Both white men, they wore crisp uniforms with gleaming badges pinned to their chests. Thomas, the taller one, with cropped sandy hair, stood with his arms crossed, sizing Evelyn up with a skeptical stare. Daniel, a stockier man with a solid frame, elbowed his partner and muttered something under his breath. They shared a low laugh before Thomas spoke up. "Bet she came in on first class," he said with a sneer. "Yeah, a black woman dressed that sharp?" "Too odd," Daniel snickered. Thomas kept his gaze on Evelyn, nodding. "Mighty, a smuggler or some sort of con. Did you catch that lofty air about her? Something's off?" Daniel grinned. "Oh, that I'm above you lot vibe. Can't stand it." Thomas dropped his voice, his words dripping with spite. Daniel shrugged, a glint of mischief in his eyes. "Fine by me. If it goes south, we'll have a reason to cuff her." The two exchanged a knowing glance, their plans silently sealed. Without hesitation, they strode toward Evelyn. Expressions oozing arrogance and bias. Evelyn, still oblivious to the scrutiny, moved forward with unwavering poise, but in moments, her path would be interrupted, and the situation would veer sharply off course. She made her way down the broad airport concourse toward the baggage reclaim, surrounded by the usual flurry of passengers, some lugging heavy cases, others chattering urgently or tapping away at their phones. Yet amid the busy throng, 2 uniformed figures closed in, their faces shadowed with ill intent. Thomas Hayes and Daniel Shaw marched ahead, their sights set on Evelyn as if she were a lurking danger. When they were just a few feet away, Thomas cleared his throat and barked, his voice loud and commanding yet thick with disdain. "Oh, you there, halt!" Evelyn stopped in her tracks and turned, her piercing eyes flickering with surprise. Evelyn saw two policemen approaching her, their faces set in stern lines. She quickly assessed their bearing. Both carried an overbearing swagger. Chins jutted in overbearing swagger. Chins jutted out in challenge. A sinking feeling stirred within her. Thomas planted himself in front of Evelyn, arms crossed tightly over his chest, while Daniel stood to the side, his eyes raking over her from head to toe. "What's this about?" Evelyn asked, her voice steady but resolute. Thomas arched an eyebrow. "Can you show us some ID?" Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She'd cleared every security check without issue. There was no lawful reason for this stop. She was no stranger to such encounters, to being singled out for no reason beyond her skin color, but she held her reaction in check. "I'd like to know why you're asking," she said, her tone still even. Daniel smirked, folding his arms. "We've got the right to check anyone we reckon looks off, and frankly, you seem plenty suspicious." Evelyn's gaze hardened, though she felt the sting of unfairness. "Suspicious?" She raised an eyebrow. "Care to explain what exactly about me strikes you as suspicious?" Thomas shook his head, tooting loudly. "This isn't a debate, love. Not cooperating, are you? If you've got nothing to hide, hand over your papers." Evelyn drew a slow breath, steadying herself. She knew her rights. She hadn't broken any rules, and there was no hint of odd behavior. But she also knew that to these two, her blackness was reason enough. She calmly opened her bag, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and retrieved her driver's license and official ID card. She offered them to Thomas without a flicker of unease. He glanced at the documents but didn't take them, instead flashing a mocking grin. Daniel nudged him, chuckling. "Blimey, she's well prepared," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "This legit, or something you picked up cheap on the dark web?" Evelyn blinked, disbelief sparking into quiet fury, though she kept her voice level. "Are you suggesting my legal documents are forged?" Thomas smirked, arms still crossed. "We're just doing our job. Saw someone like you, dressed too posh, strutting about too sure of herself. We had to check you weren't up to no good. Someone like her." Crystallizing the truth of the matter, it wasn't about suspicion. It was that a black woman in a costly suit, moving with confidence through Heathrow, didn't fit their narrow view. She tightened her grip on her wallet, but kept her tone firm. "Insist you verify my papers right now, or I'm within my rights to walk away," Evelyn said sharply. Daniel burst into laughter, as if she'd told a hilarious joke. "Who do you reckon you are?" he sneered, glancing at Thomas. "Must think she's some big shot." Thomas nodded, his expression smug. "Ah, black woman in fancy gear. Don't you find that odd, Dan?" Evelyn's grip tightened on her bag, a flush of anger rising in her chest. She was no stranger to this treatment, but keeping her temper in check wasn't always easy. "I won't stand here and be insulted," she said firmly. "I've shown you my proper documents, and I deserve the same respect as any other passenger." Thomas's face hardened, his eyes turning icy. He stepped closer, looming over her. "Listen, love," he growled. "We decide who's dodgy around here, and if I say it's you, then it's you." Daniel stood beside him, arms crossed, a smirk playing on his lips. "Think you can get away with that tone? Sorry, no special treatment for you." Evelyn clenched her jaw but stood her ground. "I won't let you misuse your authority like this. You're targeting me because of my skin color, and I won't tolerate it." A tense silence hung in the air. Then Thomas smirked and tilted his head toward Daniel. "She's a stubborn one," he said. "My baby, we ought to teach her how to play nice with the law." Before Evelyn could respond, Daniel seized her wrists, yanking them back. Cold handcuffs snapped shut around them in an instant. Startled, she twisted against his grip. "What are you doing?" "I've done nothing wrong." Thomas loomed in front of her, his gaze daring her to resist. "You're under arrest for failing to comply with security." "If I were you, I'd keep quiet." Evelyn's blood surged with fury, but she locked eyes with the two men abusing their power. Knowing this was no minor skirmish, she also knew that it made a colossal error, one that I'd soon regret. The cuffs bit into her wrists, Yet she stayed composed. Yet she faced worse in her career. Threats, surveillance, even staring down armed traffickers. But she never imagined such flagrant injustice at a major British airport, all because of her race. Daniel shoved her shoulder, pushing her forward. "Move it, your ladyship," he jeered. "Let's see how high and mighty you feel at the station." Evelyn didn't resist or cry out. She fixed them with an icy stare, fully aware of their game. They thought they could break her, reduce her to another silence victim, like countless black people wronged before her. Wasn't about to bend. Thomas and Daniel had no idea they'd just blundered into the greatest misstep of their careers. "I suggest you verify my identity at once," Evelyn said, her voice steady and commanding. If you don't, you'll regret this dearly." Thomas burst out laughing, turning to Daniel. "Hear that? She's threatening us now." Daniel shrugged, grinning slyly. "Must reckon she's some VIP." Evelyn's face remained impassive. How? Well, she knew reasoning with them was futile. Instead, she locked eyes with them and repeated, each word deliberate. "Check my identity. Now, ow." Thomas opened his mouth to retort, but another voice cut through first. "Oi, what's all this?" They turned to see an airport security officer striding toward them, clad in a Navy uniform with a name tag pinned to his chest. It was Peter Langston, a seasoned Heathrow veteran with over 20 years on the job. He'd been passing by when he spotted Evelyn in handcuffs and instantly felt something was off. "What's going on here?" Langston asked, his gaze flicking from Evelyn to Thomas and Daniel. Thomas smirked, arms crossed. "Just a dodgy type not playing along. We're taking her in for a chat." Langston studied Evelyn closely. Something about her rang a bell. Unshaken poise, her commanding presence, and those piercing, confident eyes. Then it clicked, and his face paled. "Hold on. This is Dr. Evelyn Carter." Thomas and Daniel froze for a beat. Langston spun toward them, his voice sharpening. "Do you two have any clue who she is?" "She's a top MI5 officer." Daniel let out a scoff, shaking his head. "Come off it. Are you having a laugh? Just 'cause a black woman's in a posh suit doesn't make her a bigwig." Thomas chuckled too. "Yeah, probably thought she'd trick us by dressing like some exec." Evelyn stayed silent, her gaze fixed on the pair. Bigotry like theirs clung to assumptions over evidence. Langston shook his head, his expression darkening. "I'm dead serious. If you don't believe me, look her up right now. If you've really cuffed an MI5 agent, you're in deeper than you can imagine." Thomas and Daniel exchanged a glance. Doubt crept in, though they still weren't convinced. "No need for that," Thomas muttered, jutting out his chin. "I don't need lessons on my own job." Daniel snickered, folding his arms and eyeing Evelyn. "Must be one of those high-flying black sorts. Always a few about." Langston sighed, exasperation clear on his face. He knew if these two pressed on, they'd not only lose their badges, but face severe repercussions. He didn't want to wade into this mess, but he couldn't stand by either. Peter Langston couldn't just stand there and watch this travesty unfold. Before he could speak again, a voice crackled over Thomas's radio. "Hey, Shaw, report in now." Shaw, report in now. "Had word of a major issue with an arrest. Verify the detainee's identity immediately." It was Inspector Sarah Fielding, their direct supervisor. Thomas scowled, irritation flashing across his face. It's just a routine stop, ma'am. Nothing." "Major," he grumbled into the radio. "Check the ID now." Fielding's voice snapped, leaving no room for argument. Thomas muttered a curse under his breath, then reluctantly pulled out his phone. He punched Evelyn's driver's license details into the system while Daniel stood beside him, arms crossed, his defiance still intact. Seconds later, the screen lit up with the results. Thomas's face drained of color. His eyes locked on the display in stunned silence. Daniel frowned, leaning over to peek at the screen. Both men turned to stone, staring at the phone. The words, "Dar, Evelyn Carter, Senior MI5 Officer," sliced through their inflated bravado like a blade. Daniel broke first, his face ashen, hands trembling slightly. This can't be right," he stuttered. "It can't be." Thomas fared no better, his body rigid, throat parched. Pat has slaughtered innocent people before, driven by bias. But this was the first time he grasped the full weight of his error, an error, with no way back. Meanwhile, Evelyn stood motionless, her gaze as cold and cutting as steel. She didn't rant or resist, she simply watched them. And that quiet scrutiny unnerved them more than any outburst could. Thomas lurched forward, fumbling with the handcuff keys in a panic. He nearly dropped them in his haste. When the cuffs clicked open, Evelyn rubbed her wrists, faint red marks still visible. "Dr. Carter, I'm so sorry," Thomas stammered, his earlier swagger gone. "We didn't know. I mean, it was a mix-up." Daniel nodded hastily, jumping in to salvage things. Just standard security steps. Ma'am, no harm meant, honest." Evelyn raised an eyebrow, slowly crossing her arms. "A mix-up?" she echoed, her voice laced with biting sarcasm. Thomas bobbed his head eagerly. "Yes, you see, we're just keeping the airport safe. No offense intended, really." Evelyn let out a dry chuckle. "Let me ask you this," she said, her eyes drilling into them like a magistrate. If I were a white woman in a suit, striding confidently out of security, would you have stopped me? Would you have stopped me then?" Evelyn's question hung in the air, leaving Thomas and Daniel mute. They couldn't respond immediately. The truth was too glaring. Their actions indefensible beyond the stain of racial bias. Evelyn pressed on, her voice steady but cutting. "Had no valid reason to suspect me. I've done nothing suspicious, breached no security rules, given no hint I warranted stopping. Your eye, the color of my skin." Daniel swallowed hard, grasping for words, but nothing could salvage their position. By now, a cluster of passengers nearby had tuned into the exchange. A few whipped out their phones, filming the scene. A middle-aged woman furrowed her brow and muttered, "What's happening here?" A man beside her answered quickly, "Those two coppers just cuffed an MI5 officer." "Cause sees black?" Whispers rippled through the growing crowd, sharp glares landing on Thomas and Daniel. An older gent in a suit shook his head. "Unbelievable. Still seeing this rubbish in London." A young woman angled her phone closer, zooming in on the officers. "This is going online. Let's see how they wriggle out of it." Thomas and Daniel's bravado faltered, fear creeping in. They banked on an apology smoothing things over, not anticipating a public recording that could spread like wildfire. Daniel raised his hands, flustered, trying to quiet the onlookers. "Everyone please, settle down. This is just a mix-up." "What mix-up?" A woman snapped, jabbing a finger at them. "He called her a bigwig. I heard it plain as day." Sweat beaded down Thomas's back. The situation was spiraling beyond their grip. Meanwhile, Evelyn stood serene. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Seconds later, a voice answered, unwavering. "I'm reporting an incident of power abuse and racial discrimination at Heathrow. Send internal affairs now." Thomas and Daniel blanched. Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came. Thomas, once brimming with arrogance, felt his throat close up. It didn't take long for the system to react. After Evelyn's call, MI5's internal affairs unit mobilized swiftly. Within the hour, a team of investigators descended on Heathrow, where Thomas and Daniel were pulled aside for time questioning. When Inspector Sarah Fielding, their supervisor, stepped into the room, her gaze was steely with disapproval. She'd served for decades, and this was a stain she hadn't expected under her watch. For years and witnessed plenty of officers stepping out of line, but this went beyond anything she could stomach. "Thomas Hayes, Daniel Shaw," she said, her voice low and piercing as she fixed her gaze on her subordinates. "You've made a monumental blunder." Thomas started to speak, but Fielding raised a hand sharply. "I don't want excuses. We've got everything. CCTV footage, witness accounts, and Dr. Carter's official report." Daniel's fist tightened, his face ghostly white. Where? Didn't mean it to." Fielding cut him off, her eyes flashing with contempt. "Didn't mean it? You think cuffing a senior MI5 officer without cause, just because she's black, is an accident? You've shamed the force." Thomas dropped his head, unable to muster a defense. Fielding exhaled heavily, then delivered her verdict. "As of now, you're both suspended indefinitely." Before investigation's coming, and I'll see to it you face the consequences. The words struck Thomas and Daniel like a sledgehammer. Suspension meant their careers were hanging by a thread. Once probed for power abuse, their odds of staying in policing were next to nil. In the days that followed, incident blew up online. A video of Evelyn in handcuffs at Heathrow went viral, racking up millions of views and furious comments. Public outrage forced a swift, open investigation. My5 and the Metropolitan Police dissected the evidence, Evelyn's testimony, airport staff statements, and security footage. The findings were damning. Thomas Hayes and Daniel Shaw had abused their authority and acted with racial bias. With that, both were sacked on the spot and blacklisted, barring them from ever working in law enforcement again. When the dismissal notice came, Thomas slammed his badge onto the desk. This isn't fair, he bellowed. Daniel, crushed, pleaded, please, don't do this. We can fix it. But their words fell on deaf ears. Justice had been done. Soon after, Evelyn was inundated with interview requests from major UK broadcasters. Looking straight into the camera, her voice firm and unwavering, she said, "My ordeal isn't unique. How many other people of color face this without a title or power to fight back? The system must change. Police can't keep wielding power without accountability." Her words ignited fierce debate across the UK. Peaceful protests sprang up, demanding reform and an end to such abuses. Evelyn's words sparked fierce debate across the United Kingdom. Peaceful protests erupted, calling for police reform, with many NPS and senior officials voicing support for overhauling law enforcement oversight. Within months, Thomas Hayes and Daniel Shaw had vanished from the policing world. No force would touch two officers so publicly disgraced for their abuse of power. Meanwhile, Evelyn pressed on with her work at My5, now driven by a broader purpose: rooting out racism within the justice system. One evening, after delivering a powerful speech on legal reform, she left the agency's headquarters and slipped into her car. For a moment, she sat in silence, her mind drifting back to that day at Heathrow. Two officers cuffing her without a second thought, convinced their authority was untouchable. They'd been wrong. A faint smile crossed her lips as she gazed out at London's glowing skyline. The battle was far from over, but today, justice had prevailed. Those who misuse power would always face a reckoning, and those bold enough to stand for truth, even alone, could shift the world. Thank you for listening to this story. If it resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful tales. Tomorrow will bring you another one worth hearing. Dr. Evelyn Carter's ordeal at London Heathrow Airport, where she was unjustly handcuffed by prejudiced officers. Thomas Hayes and Daniel Shaw, only to rise above their abuse with poise and turn it into a catalyst for UK-wide reform, offers timeless lessons for life. Her unwavering calm under pressure teaches us that dignity in adversity can outshine fleeting arrogance, a wisdom seniors know well from years of navigating challenges. Her solitary stand, amplified by bystanders and culminating in the officer's downfall, proves that one voice, however isolated, can spark change if it dares to speak truth. A reminder that age or circumstance never dims your impact. Personal injustice into a fight for systemic good shows that setbacks, even late in life, can fuel purpose, while the eventual triumph of justice over bias underscores that patience and persistence, values cherished by many seniors, ultimately prevail. Life, like her story, rewards those who hold firm, call out wrong, and trust in the slow but steady arc of righteousness.